Within the 80s, horror gave birth to some of the greatest icons. The Evil Dead, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Chucky, Pinhead, even the Gremlins. But for a lot of us that lived in the 80s, even my generation who were just kids, that decade seems like some sort of bizarre historical punchline. Nobody takes it seriously. So maybe there are filmmakers, especially in the horror genre, that want us to take that part of our history a little more seriously. Maybe it's not just a casual throwback to a genre's greatest era. The 80s aren't just about leg warmers or crazy hairdos. They're not about the video games, TV shows, and movies like we'd like to remember. The 80s are actually much more of a cultural mirror to today's society. Things that were scary in the 80s are even scarier now, which is maybe why the 80s are the perfect setting when it comes to horror TV shows and movies. It's so perfect that I mentioned that we still don't take the 80s seriously, because much like the 80s, things you once considered a joke can come back to haunt you. What a perfect segue into the world of politics, something you probably didn't realize was there when you're watching a movie about a group of kids who are tormented by a demonic clown, or a TV show about a different group of kids who are tormented by demon dogs and other things. But the fact is, the Duffer Brothers, the creators of Stranger Things, in the second season had political Easter eggs. You may have noticed the advertisements on people's lawn, political signs talking about Reagan and Bush's campaign, or even signs telling the citizens where they can vote. It's a funny yet clever comparison to the American election of last year, where somebody that no one took seriously became the President of the United States, or at least took office. But the fact is, the Duffers didn't have to make it October of '84. They didn't have to make it political or put political signs out on characters' lawns, but they did. This Easter egg may be a nod to the fact that Reagan really became president more because of his celebrity persona than his politics. But the scariest thing about this isn't the fact that we now live in the era of a Trump administration. It's the fact that both groups of kids in Stranger Things and It feel that they can't trust authority. Any adult in a position of power is basically untrustworthy. The kids in It, the Losers Club, specifically mention that every adult in Derry doesn't see the evil around them. They're basically useless in the battle against evil, and in fact Bev's father and other adults even caused that evil. Parental figures in Stranger Things are even untrustworthy. If you consider Papa in season 1, an evil surrogate father figure who subjects Eleven to abuse. But even the ones who aren't pure evil seem like they're untrustworthy. Hopper, a stand-up guy, the sheriff of the town, and a man who has fought this paranormal evil before, takes Eleven in the second season. He doesn't abuse her, but there's a very pivotal scene where they have an immense fight, and she no longer feels like she can trust him. You can even consider the new characters in season 2. Bob is a character who basically just shows us how much he's like Sean Astin, but he's not trusted by Will or Jonathan. Simply because he's new, or simply because he's a surrogate father. And if you consider the new head of Hawkins Laboratory, played by Paul Reiser, it's another man who really doesn't do all that much evil, who seemingly wants to help, but we just can't trust him. And ironically enough, played by Paul Reiser, who's a man who early in his career played figures of authority that can't be trusted. The global politics and the parental figures even go hand in hand when it comes to untrustworthiness. Dr. Owens, played by Paul Reiser, even tells Nancy and Jonathan that if Hawkins' secret were to get out, it would be the Russians that would use it to their advantage. Will is often used as a spy against his will when it comes to the shadow monster and the right side up world. It really mirrors the paranoia that we felt not only in the 80s at the end of the Cold War era, but maybe the new Cold War we're in with Russia right now. So it comes down to one thing: don't trust the man. Having the heroes as children really mirrors how a lot of us feel, that many of us in a safer Western culture still don't feel safe. Adding this little political twist is a great way to give the horror a new level, because we relate to these children, not just because they're going through horrific situations, but because in this political climate, I believe a lot of people feel alone. Another factor that may contribute to this smaller political topic is that of racism. One glaring and obvious comparison that you can make when you look at both ragtag groups of kids is the fact that there's only one African American kid in both groups. And I believe that's a very specific choice, not only by the Duffers when it comes to Stranger Things, but by Stephen King when he wrote the original It novel. Another very specific choice is when they created the 2017 version of It that they changed the original era from the 1950s to the 1980s. In the novel, the N-word is used an astonishing 102 times. That's an awful but true look at an evil within North American society. But when it's set in the 80s, does that lessen the evil? Not at all. In fact, it only changes how we perceive that evil. Take, for instance, what Mike sees in It. When Pennywise puts the waking nightmares into the heads of the Losers Club, Mike specifically sees two things in the novel: a giant bird and the fire at the black spot. In the film, the giant bird is gone, but the black spot is still there. And anybody who has read the novel gets the fact that that was a hate crime committed by a white supremacy group just to kill black people. So why keep that one in and not the giant bird? Obviously, there's subtext to that. How our perception of racism changed in the 30 years is basically what I think the filmmakers are trying to show us. That racism was not gone in the 80s. It was a much more progressive time, arguably, but it wasn't gone. In fact, racism operated much like Pennywise did, under the surface, and only those who are a victim to his evil can really perceive it. And if you don't think Stranger Things addresses that either, think again. Lucas is a strong black character in Stranger Things, perhaps only outdone by his little sister when it comes to strength, but there's one very specific scene that shows a little bit of tension between he and another member of the group. When the boys dress up as the Ghostbusters on Halloween, he and Mike have what seems like an innocent enough argument. They both want to be Peter Venkman, because who wouldn't want to be Peter Venkman? But Mike specifically says that Lucas should have been Zedmore. Again, that scene, that argument may seem innocent enough, but it actually says a lot about the society. We know Mike to be a heroic kid. We know him to be brave, stand up for his friends, and stand up for what's right. But it says a lot when he considers his black friend to be the one who should be Winston. It says a lot about the society he lives in, the society he was raised in, and the fact is that that's the way he sees the world. It's a really interesting connection that a lot of these subtextual elements that are present aren't things that really went away. They're just things that we tried to forget. So from figurative viruses like racism that affect American society to literal ones, there may be something else you tried to forget about the 80s. Sadly, this is not something that has gone away either, and that's the horrible disease of AIDS. Now in the 80s, not only did AIDS get its name, did it become the epidemic that we know it to be, but it claimed thousands of lives during that decade. Now I know what you're thinking. There's no way that Stranger Things or It is specifically or even subtextually about AIDS, but you can't ignore some of the coincidences. It shows a very specific phobia when it comes to one of the Losers Club members, Eddie. Eddie is a hypochondriac. He's had medical issues most of his life, at least medical issues that his mother may have imposed upon him. And when he sees Pennywise, when he sees his waking nightmare, it's a shell of a man who suffers from leprosy. It's a very scary scene within the novel, and the film doesn't disappoint either. In Stranger Things Season 2, the evil that spreads, and that even takes over Will's body, spreads like a virus. It's often referred to as a virus or a fever, and in fact, most of the time it's Dr. Owen's character that gives people the bad news. It becomes less paranormal and more biological. Like I said in the intro, the things that were scary in the 80s are even scarier now. It seems like every day we're reading about a new super virus that could kill us all, or the fact is that simple things spread due to anti-vaccination movements. But I bet you don't question how you get that information. And I bet you it's probably first thing in the morning sitting on the toilet reading your phone. Let's just hope you washed your hands. No, the point is, it's all about the internet, and I'll give you one guess as to what decade that was invented. There has to be reason that Bob works for Radio Shack and knows everything about camcorders and basic computer language. There has to be a reason that 11 communicates through the white noise static of TVs and radios. It's not just so we can laugh at the large, bulky items we used to have in the 80s, it's to show us that ever since the 80s, this is how we're really connected. And if you don't think that's at least a little scary, then chances are you stay off the YouTube comments section and Twitter altogether. And if that's the case, you're a good person too chaste for this world. There's a reason that I saved this one for last, and that's because it actually connects all the aforementioned previous little evils together. If you look at how the two main antagonistic forces in both Stranger Things and It get around, it's through a series of underground tunnels, an interconnected web that spreads across the entire world that our heroes live in. But it's a web that also has its own dangers and traps. Xenophobia, misinformation, a mistrust of authority, and even viruses can spread because of this worldwide web I keep hearing about. But really, within the context of Stranger Things Season 1 and 2, and it's It's a commentary on how in the 80s we first became a global community. And believe it or not, there are dangers associated with that. Both evil antagonistic forces live just underneath the surface. They live in the upside down, hidden in the depths of our ordinary lives. And sometimes that's the scariest thing. You just have to remember that sometimes the scariest thing about this world is just how we treat one another. Hey Real students, thanks for watching. If you want to subscribe to Real School, click that round Real School logo right beside me. Also click that damn notification bell so you're aware of all of Real School's new content. You can follow me on Twitter, and of course, if you get anything out of Real School, you can always give a little back. Just click the link in the description below or the button down there, and you can become part of my Patreon team.